And let me say before we get started, let me just say thank you, publicly say thank you to Jay for putting this together. I'm really excited about this workshop today because it's going to teach us cool ways to be engaging with students and not doing the same thing every day, right? So a little bit of lecture, a little bit of breakout room, a little bit of lecture, right? With something to kind of break up what we're doing online. I think this will be helpful in a number of ways. And so Jay, thanks for doing this.
Yeah, absolutely. So I put 2 links in the chat there because I'm doing things differently than I usually do. Because I don't know, I'm kind of tired of slides. So I'm not really using them in my classes, and so I'm trying some different things here. So the first one, that one that says Padlet.com, is the actual kind of main presentation that I've actually got up here on the screen. And this is one of the tools I wanted to demonstrate for you. And so I thought I would just go ahead and actually put together the presentation in that way. But I wanted to give you a link to it because it is a collaborative environment. And so you can make comments, you can like the posts and things like that as well. So you can use that link. You don't need to log in. You don't need an app or anything like that. It'll open up in a browser and you can follow along. It's kind of disorganized the way I did it. It's more kind of like a flowchart mind map kind of thing. And so that's why I'm sharing the screen so that you can kind of follow along without me having to kind of constantly say, okay, now move here. But if you open that up, you'll have access to some links of things we'll be doing. And so that's the easiest thing. And I wanted to do a little bit of preliminary activity here, but I put the link to that second link I put in there, the Jamboard link, is also the link that is in this blue field right here, right? So go ahead and click on that, and that's going to open up a Google Jamboard, which is another tool I wanted to demonstrate for you all and have you all play with. Some of you have played with this already in some other workshops we've done, or you might be familiar with it already. And we'll come back to kind of the ideas behind some of this. But Jamboard is part of the larger Google suite. It's not kind of the core Office part of it, but it is part of it. So we all have access to it through our Xavier accounts. And it's a collaborative whiteboard. So what I want you to do here, just as a little practice, I want you to post one little sticky note, and that arrow is pointing to the sticky note icon in the toolbar. One sticky note with a question you have about collaborative activities in the classroom, so that if I don't cover it in the actual talk, we'll make sure we kind of talk about it at some point. And then you can see you can move those around. You can change the color. You can change the size of those as well. And I think Tyra is just joining us. I'm going to go ahead and add these links back into the chat so that she can access those. Hey, Tyra, if you use that first link I just did, the Jamboard one, that'll get you to what everybody's doing right now, and which you should be able to kind of see working on the screen here. And just as we're doing this, I'll kind of glance at a couple of these things that I didn't necessarily include in the talk. Let's see, somebody asked about privacy issues, which I think is a great thing to consider with any sort of online technology, right? Most of the things I'm going to show you can be restricted to just a limited group of people, right? Much the way, like anything in Google, and we'll actually talk about some of the settings where you can either open it up to the world, or you can open it up to only people who have access to the link that you provide, or you can get even more restrictive with Google. And Padlet and some of these other things are kind of the same thing. So I don't think too often privacy issues are too much of a concern, because most of this stuff is not just going out publicly. Savable, yeah, absolutely. This Padlet that we'll be taking a look at is you can save that. Although, to be honest with you, if you do kind of funky formatting like I did, it doesn't work. And with the Jamboard, very easy to download as a PDF or a JPEG. And I'll do that quite often. If we use it for kind of a brainstorming session, I'll download it and post it to Brightspace or bring it back the next week or whatever. We'll talk about some of the benefits in a bit and kind of the pros and cons of each, I think, or kind of the better uses. Topics and activities, we'll talk about that in a little bit. Some have picks and some don't. So with Google, and again, we'll come back to this, right? And a lot of these, one of the things you always want to think about with collaborative work in the classroom is how much work do the students or the participants have to do to get access to what you want them to collaborate on. And I think that kind of ties in a little bit with the privacy issues. Right? So with Google, when you share a link like this, if people are logged into their Google account, when they click on that link, the way looks like Janice and Bart and Elizabeth and Erica are, they'll show up. Their little icons show up here at the top. Those anonymous ones are people who are not currently logged into their Google account, right? And so Google assigns them these kind of weird little things like anonymous otter and anonymous platypus and things like that. So these do work all right on phones. Not necessarily as great, although the students are very good at doing a lot in that tiny little space, as opposed to some of us, right? So they seem less inhibited by that kind of tiny little space. So a lot of this stuff does work well. Padlet, and a lot of these you can get apps for the phone, and so it'll work a little bit better if you have the app, but it'll also work in the phone's browser as well. So again, that portability, I think, is something we always want to think about with work like this, which is how easy is it going to be for the students to access it? How many kind of hoops are they going to have to jump through to get to it? And how hard is it going to be for them to see them, depending on what kind of device they have, right? I think those are great questions. And most of this stuff is set up to be very adaptive to whatever environment the users are working with. All right, I think that's pros. Yeah, like I said, we'll talk about some of the pros and cons and things like that as well. We do want to think about, obviously, the digital divide, right? Again, I'm doing all my classes are fully remote this semester, right? And so the students did know going in that they would need, to have certain, I don't require webcams and stuff like that, but obviously they knew they needed reliable internet access, right? They needed something to kind of access it with as well. But I also find these are pretty useful to do in the classroom as well. I had already started doing some of this in the classroom. And it was the kind of thing where I would kind of say, let's do an activity. Now you can take out your phones, right? And use your phones or your iPads or whatever, or your laptop to do this collaborative thing. And then I would have kind of this version up on the screen. And so even in the classroom, it was a nice way to kind of the proper use of technology in the classroom as opposed to any other kind of improper use of technology. But we do always want to kind of bear in mind what the students have access to. And so I would always, you'd always just kind of want to say, is anybody going to have a problem? Does anybody not have a way to access this right now? Okay, I think those are some great questions, right? And I think what I haven't kind of specifically responded to right here is stuff I'll kind of come back to in a little bit. So I'm going to repost real quickly the link to the Padlet, just in case anybody still needs it, right? Like I said, you can just follow along on the shared screen, or if you want to open that up on your computer or separately on your phone or something, you can do that as well. That way the links are live, and you can also comment on any of these little posts as well. Padlet's a pretty nice. Padlet is a online collaborative pinboard, I guess is the best way, kind of the comparison, right? If Jamboard is a whiteboard, all right, where we kind of write sketch notes, Padlet is much more kind of a place where we might pin like index cards and do that kind of thing, right? It reminds me of, I always look at it. It kind of reminds me, you can kind of see I've got it set up this way here, kind of like when you watch a detective show and they've got like the big screen where they're trying to connect all the different pieces and evidence and stuff like that, right? It's a way to kind of pull all that visual information together. Okay, so those are a couple of demos. We're going to come back to talk about those tools a little more specifically at the end as well. I did want to talk a little bit about the theory underlying all of this, which is a pretty old theory to begin with. And so it's obviously great to kind of see that this stuff is not only relevant, but maybe having almost kind of an opportunity to kind of remind us of some stuff, you know, we may have kind of let fall by the wayside. As well. And so Sakina in the chat, do you find Padlets better for synchronous or asynchronous interaction? One thing I use Padlet for quite a bit is kind of mind mapping, brainstorming. One advantage it has over like the Jamboard is it's much easier to kind of pull in different things like websites and videos and images and things like that. It's much more kind of adaptive to that. And so I'll kind of put one up there on the screen and kind of give the students the link and then say, okay, go out and find some source that talks about this concept, right? And so that works really nicely. And then we'll just kind of drop it in there and things like that. And so it can work pretty nice synchronously, but it could also be the kind of thing where you've got it out there and say, okay, sometime in the next 2 days, you know, post 2 links or 2 videos that you found or whatever, or post 2 comments to this video that I've posted as well. So I think it works equally well. And I think that's a really good question, Sakina, because I'm having, you know, again, this semester, more so even than I did last semester, students who are not able to log in on a given class time, right? In part because I ended up with a fair number of athletes in my 2 sections this semester. I've got students who are on the women's softball team and then some students who are on the basketball team, right? And last week in particular, they were all traveling, right? And so they were missing class, right? But I'm really trying to be mindful that when they miss class, that they can still kind of participate in the activities. And so something like that as well. The students who are here can work synchronously, but the students who miss class for whatever reason, tech problems, personal problems, travel, can come back and still participate in it because it stays live as long as you want to leave it live. So I think it works equally as well. It just depends on how you want to use it. So to just talk a little bit about the pedagogy, I think, underlying all of this, right? It goes back to Vygotsky's idea of the zone of proximal learning, right? Which is really just essentially kind of fancy way of saying the space between what the student is capable of doing, potentially capable of doing through learning, and what the student can do right now at the moment that learning is beginning, right? But specifically, Vygotsky talks about the need for 3 things for successful learning to get the student from where they are now to where they can be, which is they need to have the presence of somebody with the knowledge and skills to guide them, right? Which is us most of the time, right? They need supportive and scaffolded activities to help them practice those things, right? And I think this is the one that often kind of gets set aside sometimes in terms of this kind of learning, is they need social interactions to both observe and practice those skills, right? So it's not enough for them to learn in that bubble, right? According to Vygotsky's ideas, they need to learn within the larger context of some social situation. And so, I mean, that's this theory goes back almost now 100 years, right? 85 years or so, right? I should never do math on the fly. But it's not, like I said, not only still relevant today, but it's finding almost, I think, kind of a new relevance in this remote world, right? Because all of us have been kind of stumbling through for the past year, trying to figure out the best way to interact with our students and to get our students to interact with us and with each other in this restrictive environment, right? And I think everybody here is already kind of sold on the idea that just talking to the students through the camera is not enough, right? I think we're all at that, beyond that point already, right? But now it's a question of, okay, so what can we do with them? And like Elizabeth said, breakout rooms are great, right? But how often are you going to just do breakout rooms, right? And then what are you going to do in them, right? And I did a poll with my students last week, or I think the first week of the semester, and I said, it's just, I used the poll in Zoom, and I said, so how often do you think we should use breakout rooms in this class, right? And the majority in both my classes came back and said, I think once a week is okay. Some students came back and said twice a week. Every class is fine with me, right? Majority said, over 50% in both classes said once a week is okay, and smaller percentages said less than once a week, and then a couple in each class said please don't ever use them. But I kind of said we needed to compromise a little bit. So and they are great, right? And we can talk about kind of doing collaboration in those, right? But a lot of what I'm going to talk about today lets us kind of, in a way, break free of the collaboration, or gives them something, I think, more meaningful to do in those breakout rooms, right? I think a lot of us, I know I, especially last spring, kind of fell into this habit of okay, we've all talked and nobody's responding to my questions anymore. So let's get into breakout rooms and you all talk together, right? And I think we've probably mostly seen that works to a limited extent, right? I was complaining the other day about my students not responding to my kind of big group prompts, right? In these freshman classes, and my stepdaughter, who's a sophomore, right, so we'll put them in breakout rooms, right? Because we always talk in breakout rooms, right? And we do, but I think just putting them in breakout rooms is not always quite enough, right? So we want to think about some things they can do for this. And so I see kind of posting in there about specific things to do, and I think that's part of this collaborative process, is we need to give them real specific things to do. So if the underlying theory, right, of what Vygotsky told us 85 years ago isn't quite enough to kind of say, okay, let's think about ways we can incorporate collaborative learning into our classrooms, there's more recent work on this. And so this first pink box is a link to an article from about four or 5 years ago, which talks about some of the specific academic and personal benefits of doing collaborative work, right, in the classroom. And in particular, they said it shows improvements, and this was kind of a meta study, meta-analysis of various articles about collaborative learning. They found that by using collaborative learning in the classroom, right, students had demonstrated improvements in their achievements with the skills and knowledge, as well as in their productivity, right? So they were getting more done as a result of that work, right? They were also seeing specific improvements in having supportive relationships with their classmates, right? Which I think all of us know that a lot of our students are struggling with right now, right? Feeling, again, disconnected, not just academically, but just kind of personally as well. And they were seeing benefits in both mental health and self-esteem, right? So the collaborative work is not just beneficial academically, right, in the direct sense, right? It's beneficial mentally for our students. It's beneficial socially for our students as well. And again, I think in this environment we've been in now for the past year, that stuff's even more important, right? And so I think if we can give them work to do that helps improve that, it makes them feel better, right, about their situation, all the better, right? This other pink box links to a quick video. I'm not going to show it. It's only about 2 minutes, so you can watch it some other time. Just talking about collaborative work as, what we've been calling on campus 21st century skill, right? We were doing a lot of work in the past few years with the CPI grant, the Career Pathways Initiative. And a good number of us went through some of that training on infusing 21st century skills into our classrooms, right? And so again, some of the other benefits of doing collaborative work in the classroom is that students are able to ultimately, they learn how to better see specific situations from multiple viewpoints, which again is not the biggest of problems here on our campus, right? I think we've got a student body who are often open to hearing other viewpoints and thinking about other viewpoints, right? I think a lot of other schools struggle with that much more so, right? But at the same time, we live in a world right now where we have a huge problem with people being able to even kind of consider somebody else's opinion as valid, right? So again, this work can support that way of thinking. It also helps them improve their time management skills, their resource allocation skills, and their communication skills. And all those things are going to be crucially important when they go out into, the quote unquote real world, right? Whether they actually go into the business world, where they actually go into a profession, or they go into teaching, or they go into further aspects of education or whatever, they're all going to need those skills, right? And so again, collaborative learning has demonstrable impact on all of these things. I'm kind of seeing the chat moving a lot. I'm hoping, if there's something I need to specifically respond to, y'all let me know.
Yeah, Jay, I will be happy to voice the chat for you. But I think we're covering. We're just, as you're talking about ideas, there's questions about class size and how do you do this with big class sizes, and so we're kind of talking about that right now. Anybody want to unmute and ask Jay a specific question? Or are we good in the chat? Erica, why don't you unmute and ask that last question, and then we'll let you. And then I'll keep my eye on it, Jay.
So I'm curious if I can embed this so that it's live either within my PowerPoint presentation, because what I've been doing for classes to make sure that if someone has to quarantine or if they're going to be missing for long periods of time, I've been recording my classes, but I've been doing it through, Camtasia. So like I'm able to have the laptop record me. And so then when I go and put my video together, for the times where I'm just writing on the board and I'm not really using my PowerPoint, I'm able to stretch it out so they can see what I'm writing on. And so it would be nice if I could use something like this and like it still show up in the recording.
Yeah. Are you using your laptop just as kind of like a webcam just to record you live?
Yeah. Okay. And it also records the progress of the slides at the same time. So like they can see me, and when I go to edit my video so I can post the video, I try to keep a mental track of when I am actively doing stuff just on the board with them. And so I will enlarge myself then. And then when we go back to just stuff on the PowerPoint, I make myself small. And so they can still see what is actively being done in the classroom. Because there are times I just put the PowerPoint, like I just mute all the AV, and all we do is kind of work on the board as a group together or as a class together. But I'm thinking this might be a nice way to get them to work in groups, because right now they seem to be very hesitant to want to work in a group because they can't really get close to each other. They don't really want to face each other. So I'm struggling in my class where I normally do group work in stats, where we'll work like as in couples to do questions and then gather together as a classroom. They're just working individually. So I'm like, so I'm thinking this might be a nice way of incorporating that.
Yeah. I don't think you can embed it live into a PowerPoint. There's an embed option, but that's for embedding it into like a website, so that it would be kind of packaged in that. So you could actually package it. I haven't tried it, but it would probably work pretty well in like on a Brightspace page, right? But I think if I'm hearing your setup properly, and I think in particular, anybody let me know if I'm kind of misthinking about it. But if you had, say, the Padlet open on your laptop as you were recording, and then you were projecting it up on the screen, I guess if you had ideally, if you could record the screen as you were doing that, then it would capture it. But it sounds like what you're doing is actually capturing what's projected on the screen instead. So I think we'd have to kind of play with that a little bit to figure out what might work best for your And again, this is one of the big challenges of especially multimodal, which is whatever room you're in, you've got to kind of figure out this unique setup, and it's usually not the same as what somebody's doing in the next room over, because it's got a different setup, right?
Yeah, no, that is definitely true. And just trying to, so originally I was just recording myself via Zoom, but then I realized, because I would just record the shared screen, like whatever was being presented, but then they were missing anything that I was doing on the board, because that wasn't also being recorded. And that's why I switched over to essentially, I guess, recording my lecture just using, it's Camtasia, right? That's what it's called. It's the one with the C.
That's right.
Yeah. But I mean, one thing you could do if you're using Camtasia in the classroom there to record yourself, right? One of the great benefits of Camtasia over other recording things is that it can record multiple ways at once, right? And so it could be capturing through the webcam, while it's also capturing your desktop, on your laptop. And so if you've got, say, the Padlet open that you're projecting up there, I think you would probably get a clearer video of what you're doing with the Padlet by switching over to, when you're doing your editing, right, to switching over to that view instead of the screen, right? Because I used to do that with my class, and it was always a kind of a weird angle, and so the screen was kind of distorted, and then the lights kind of washed it out a bit. So that might be a possibility. Does that sound like it might work, Bart?
I think so. Yes.
Yeah. So I think that's a good possibility. But to kind of go back to your bigger question about the social distancing in the classroom and still trying to do group work. So, last semester I was teaching XCore 1000, right? And although it was supposed to be live, as all of us kind of learned, within about 3 or 4 weeks, we'd gone into, kind of multimodal learning, right? Where some students were coming to class and others were logging in through Zoom, right? I was still doing group work. I was still doing breakout rooms in that. And what I would do is make sure, I told the students, if you're coming to class, make sure you've got some device that you can log into Zoom with, right? So that you can get into these breakout rooms. And so I would create breakout rooms, and again, it would randomly assign them. So any given breakout room would have some students in person and some students remote, right? And then I would have them work on, say, a Padlet or a Google or one of these things. And again, it didn't matter if they were physically together. And I mean, obviously they lose out on a lot. We know they lose out on a lot by just not being kind of within physical proximity to each other, right? But they were still able to work together as a group pretty well, even though we had this mixed mode of some sitting in the auditorium and some in their dorm rooms and some somewhere else, right? So, we're still able to kind of get some of that work done. Okay, so again, that's just a kind of argument for thinking about. But again, I think I'm largely preaching to the choir with this group in terms of why collaborative learning is beneficial for a variety of reasons, right? The biggest point I kind of want to make here, right, is that collaborative work is more than just basic group work, right? It's more than just saying, okay, go talk to these 2 or 3 other students and then come back and tell us what you talked about, right? That's kind of the low stakes bare minimum, right? And as I think Elizabeth pointed out earlier, right? Part of the problem there is that we're not, when we do that, and I'm plenty guilty of this in the past, when we do that, we're not giving them enough to focus on, right? We're not giving them explicit instructions, right? And we're not really kind of saying, you actually have to work together on a problem. We're just saying talk to each other, and talking to each other is different than working together on a problem, right? And collaborative learning works best when the students, as you can see here, are working together to come to a conclusion or a solution, right? So they need to be given a specific task, and it's best if they can be given a task that results in a specific product or artifact, right? Something that they can then turn in or present, right? And again, just saying, come back and tell us what you talked about or tell us what you did is going to fall flat every time, right? because they're all going to kind of sit there. But if they've got something to show, right, everybody's got something to show. And so this is where the collaborative documents, I think, really kind of come into play, right? Because again, my students are spread out all over the place, right? But I can still either send them out into breakout rooms, or I can just say, okay, you three are working together, and you three are working together, and you three are working together. Because sometimes I'll give them a break and I'll say, okay, we're going to do this for 20 minutes. If you all want to get off Zoom and just work together on this document, right, where you're even not necessarily talking, depending on the task, right? Or if you want to get on Google Meets, or if you just want to chat, or whatever you're more comfortable doing, go ahead and do that, and then log back into Zoom in 20 minutes and show us what you've produced, right? So there's some options there as well, because again, some of us are just Zoom exhausted, right? Right? We want to do anything except be on Zoom at some points, right? So, but giving them, like I said, a specific task that results in a specific product or artifact is really critical to this. And you can see here, I've just got these kind of cascading arguments for this, right? Again, don't just let them report back, right? Because they're not going to have a whole lot to say. It's going to be disorganized, and you really can't hope to get a whole lot out of it in the long run, right? Give them something tangible to create, even if it's digital, right? It's still tangible in this reality, right? This gives them also a stronger requirement, right? It kind of makes it seem a little more important and urgent. If they know all they have to do is come back and talk for a few minutes, then chances are the most talkative person in the group will say, well, I'll say something when the time's ready, right? But if they have to show us, everybody else, something, they've all got to work together to put that together. It also gives you something you can review later. You can download. You can grade it if you want to, right? I don't really grade group or this kind of work in class. It's more just like, were you there and did you do it, right? But I do like being able to save it and come back to it sometimes, or to go through it sometimes. And I've got some stuff now where I need to go through it and make a few kind of minor course corrections at the next class, because I picked up a couple of things they're not quite getting, right? Requiring a product also allows the students to develop these tech skills that they need, right? So again, they get practice with building a presentation. They get practice with working on these collaborative documents. They get practice working with media and imagery and sources and things like that, right? And again, anytime we can give them opportunities to practice that, even if it's not a major outcome of our class, again, they're benefiting from it, right? Because they're going to leave the class more competent than when they came in. And one really nice thing, like I said, is you can turn off screen sharing. Now, I didn't do it for this workshop. I thought about doing it, but like I said, with Padlet, it's a little hard to kind of guide you because the structure is lacking, right? But I could have set this up in a different way and kind of had us working through a shared document all together without me sharing the screen. And again, I don't know about you all, but sharing the screen to me is starting to feel like a little bit of the sage on the stage kind of thing. Like, it's my screen and I'm going to show you what you need to look at, right? And I'm going to control it, right? And you just watch. And so I've been trying to find ways that I can break free from that and let the students kind of look at things that they need to look at a little bit more on their own. I think that makes them a little more active and a little less passive. Okay, so again, that's just kind of the setup for collaboration. And again, I think a lot of you are kind of already along the way there. So I just wanted to talk a little bit. We've played a little bit with Jamboard, right? And we'll come back to that in a little bit more, but I think you can kind of see the ways that works quite well. One of the things I really like about this, I discovered this teaching my grammar class last semester, and this is another benefit. So I would put them into, again, breakout rooms, right? I still use the breakout rooms quite a bit, right? And for my grammar class, they were often kind of parsing sentences or trying to do some kind of analysis, right? And if we were in the regular classroom, it often would have been the kind of thing where they were either coming up to the big board and doing it for everybody, or they were working with some of those small whiteboards in small groups or something along those lines, right? As many of you have probably found, when you put students in breakout rooms, you can either sit back and hope that they're doing what they're supposed to be doing, right? Or you can put them into breakout rooms, and you can spend the entire time that they're in breakout rooms hopping between breakout rooms and checking in on them and hoping that they're not just talking the second you show up, right? Or sitting there in silence, right? What I found, especially with Jamboard, is I would give them, I'd set up the one Jamboard, right? Let me just go back to that so I can kind of show you, right? And one thing you can do in Jamboard, as you probably saw up here, is you can have separate pages, just the same way you would in a regular whiteboard, right? And so I would set up a separate page for each of the groups. And I'd say, okay, group one, you're going to work on, this one, and mark it group one, right? So everybody's working on the same ultimate document, right? So I could just sit there in that main Zoom room by myself and watch them as they were adding to those whiteboards in Jamboard, right? And I can actually see them doing the work all at once. I could just kind of flip between those pages and watch as they were working on these problems together, right? Now I couldn't really tell who was doing what, right? Necessarily. Jamboard kind of shows you who's doing the writing and stuff like that. So I couldn't really necessarily tell that everybody was contributing, right? But I could see that the group was working on the problem. And so I found it a lot more kind of effective because, again, especially in a larger class, right? Every time I put students in the breakout rooms and I say, okay, I'm going to stop by to kind of see how y'all are doing, I end up having, at least 3 students who have either coming in late or get bumped out and need to get replaced, or I've got students asking me specific questions. And if I'm floating around, I might not get to them right away. So I find it much better if I can just sit in the main breakout room and be there for technical problems. But with these collaborative documents, I can see what they're producing as they're producing it, right? And so it's a way to kind of monitor their progress and work, right? And if I see one group where the Jamboard's just blank, okay, for like 5 minutes or so, then I'll jump in there. And okay, so what's going on? You guys are having some trouble, and we can talk about it. So I found it as a really nice way to kind of resolve part of that problem of me kind of having to, again, because floating around in a physical classroom is one thing. You can see the whole room and you can check on the individual groups at the same time. And you can't really do that with breakout rooms. Right?
Hey, Jay, may I ask Claire? We're getting good stuff in the chat. People are just kind of sharing some of the things that they do to monitor breakout rooms. But a quick clarification question here. So I have not used it where I've had each room have their own Jamboard. Mm-hmm. So do you just before, do you just say, here's a link for group one, here's a link for group two, do you just create different Jamboards? Can you tell us a little bit about how you do that?
No, what I do is I create one Jamboard document, right? Like this one's student engagement with collaborative documents. And then I go up here and I create multiple pages within the Jamboard, and I kind of designate group one, and I'll just put a little note in there. It'll say this is group one, this is group two, this is group three on each of those pages, right? I don't know how much of this you're seeing, right? And so then I can just kind of flip through those pages as they're working on them, and I can see live as they're writing on it, right? Because again, in the grammar class, what they were doing is a lot of I'd give them a sentence, and then they'd have to kind of scribble the kind of analysis of it. And so I could actually see them as they were writing on the Jamboard.
Okay, I see it up now. So I looked at my Jamboard just now. I went back to our Jamboard, and I see up at the top, there's like a little screen that says there's 1 of 4. Yep. And so I can tell everybody, and so I can say scroll through next frame till you find your Jamboard and do it there, and then I can keep up. Thank you for that clarification. I appreciate that.
Yeah, and that way you're also got kind of one document to kind of keep track of and one link to keep track of as well, right? So works. I found it to work pretty well, right? So I just wanted to show kind of a couple of other things that we haven't quite demoed yet or kind of call to mind. First of all, again, we've all got access to the full kind of Google suite, and all of those Google, tools within that main Office suite at least are collaborative, right? And so many of you have probably done the thing now in this past year, right? We do this in CAT a lot where we'll have like a Google Doc up, right? And we're all looking at it, right? And the rest of us can see that Elizabeth is typing something, what Elizabeth is typing as she's typing, or the comment, or, how somebody else is moving something around, right? And again, that kind of live collaboration is really kind of effective. And you can do kind of the same thing, right? If they're working on a document, you could sit there and actually kind of watch them as they work, right? Because you've given them the link to it. Right? Somebody was asking about sharing, right? And so this is something I did just the other day with my X-Core class, right? Again, we're doing this thing about Wikipedia articles and streets. We're working on articles about streets in New Orleans, right? That's kind of our research project, is they're going to be writing these articles. And of course, here's my cat who's in the way. And so this was the product I gave them, right? And I was real specific. I said, okay, I set up kind of a template, and I said, here's your one slide. Because in the past, when I've done this, I'll get some students who do like 10 slides, and I'll get some students who cram it all into one slide. So I was a little more specific. I set up kind of a template, and I said, here's what everybody's going to do, right? Your group is going to go out and research a street, right, from a Wikipedia article, right? And you're going to analyze it and assess it. You're going to say, what are the 3 strengths? What are the 3 weaknesses? And these sort of things, right? And so then they all came back, and they had this single slide that one of them would share and talk us through and sort of say, here's what we found, here's what we decided, here's what we were thinking, and those sort of things. And then again, I could download it. I downloaded them all as PDFs, which, just made it a little more, I can keep it. I can go and take a look at them later as well, right? One thing you want to be careful of with Google when you share the document, and I don't think it's going to work too well if I kind of show it on here, but when you click on that share button in a Google document, it gives you some options. And again, Bart was asking about privacy. You can restrict it, and you can say, well, you can give certain people access to that document. That's the most restrictive, right? Or you can say only people at Xavier University who have this link can access that. But as many of us kind of saw already, our students aren't always logged into their Google accounts. And so that can kind of create some problems. And I prefer to avoid those problems. And so the final setting is anybody with this link can access this document, right? And that's what I usually set it to, right? Just so that there's no, well, I can't get in, and it's not letting me, and I forgot my password and all that sort of stuff. So I just kind of skip that, right? But then you can also, with those Google documents, change their level of access, right? So you can say that anybody with this link can view this document, anybody with this link can comment on this document, or anybody with this link can edit this document. And again, you just want to kind of think about what you're having them do and how much access they need in order to do it, right? So again, for something like that, I gave them editing access, right? But again, you have to kind of pay attention to those links, because the default is, I think, usually the most secure option, which is only certain people can access this document, right? And if you do that, then you start getting, I can't access it, the link doesn't work, and all that sort of stuff. So with any of those Google things, whether it's Docs or Spreadsheet or slides, you want to watch those settings so that they can work on it as they need to work on it, right? I would guess, and again, I don't do obviously much in my classes with spreadsheets, right? But I would guess for folks who do maybe some stats or that kind of data work in classes, collaborating on a Google spreadsheet would probably be a pretty effective thing. Maybe, I don't know. That's kind of one thing I haven't played with. I've played with Docs, I've played with slides in the classroom, but I haven't really played with a spreadsheet as a collaborative assignment. Erica, you got it?
I use it for advising when we have our curriculum sheets, because that way they can see it, I can see it, and we can go together. And the nice thing is you can save versions of it. So I will, or I can go back, because sometimes students are, well, you said this. I'm like, well, no, hold on. I'm like, talk about this option or this option, because sometimes students come back with weird classes.
Yeah, you said this.
I'm like, wait, why did you retake another X-Core history class? There was no reason for it. So yeah, it's
a good point.
to do advising.
Oh yeah, signups. Signups would be a good thing for Excel, I think is what Tyra is saying, and watching them just kind of plug things in as well. So one other, and again, you've seen how Padlet works now, right? And I think I've seen some of you kind of commenting on and liking some of these little notes that I've been making, which is great, which I think is a great use, right? One other thing, this is something I used last semester for the first time, and it's a system called Hypothesis, and it's collaborative reading annotations, right? And it only works obviously for electronic documents. It works great for websites, right? It works pretty well for PDFs if the PDF has been scanned well enough that it can understand the text, right? We had some problems with some old PDFs where it didn't quite work, right? But what Hypothesis does, and Hypothesis does have this kind of annoying habit of logging you out more often than it should. So in Hypothesis, I could set up a class and I could kind of embed these documents that I wanted my students. So last semester, my students were in this dystopias class, and I did this actually before the pandemic, and I'm just obviously really glad I did, because we were all ready to go when we switched, right? But we were reading these PDFs, right? And I said, read them online and use this Hypothesis system. And what Hypothesis does is it lets them highlight things and it lets them comment on things within the text, right? And as a class, and again, this goes back to that privacy issue, you can set up the class so that only people who are enrolled in that class, that you've enrolled in that class, can access those comments. There's also obviously always a public option, but you can lock it down so that only people in the class can see one another's annotations. And so, this is just a really interesting. And again, this is a very asynchronous thing, right? Because they're not all reading at the same time. I don't think that would be a very useful way to use this. But I just said, again, in the next week when you do your reading, use this system. And my grading for this was basically like, if I felt like you were regularly responding, it was pretty loose, but if you're regularly responding, posting something or responding to somebody else's post throughout the reading, then you get a good solid grade. If I feel like you kind of didn't have a whole lot to say, then you get kind of a mediocre grade. And if you didn't respond at all, you get kind of a poor grade, right? This was really great for me because then I could come into class having seen not only that, yeah, they did the reading, and I could see some of the things they were thinking about in the reading. And a lot of times, instead of trying to say, okay, so what did you all think of this? I could say, hey, Taryn, I saw that you said this. Can you go into a little more detail? Can you ask that question a little more clearly? Or do you want to kind of, share that thought with the rest of the class, right? And I also found for the shyer students, the quieter students, they make some of the best annotations, but to get them to say that in class, it's just not likely to happen, right? So there's some great insight in there.
Jay, and thank you, Felicia, for this question, because I'm interested too. Felicia asked, how did you get the text into Hypothesis? Have you addressed that? Sorry.
I don't even think you necessarily need to set up an account with them, but if you want to have like your own class, you have to set up an account with them, and then you have to get them to set up an account. And so you do run into that problem. If you're okay just doing it a little more public or anonymous, you can also set it up. But basically what you do is you've got to have, the text has to exist somewhere on the internet, right? So like I said, for existing websites, it's great, right? Because you just grab that link. For PDFs, it still works pretty well. The PDF has to be hosted somewhere, right? So I was using a WordPress site, so I just had them hosted there. And then you just, you have to kind of know how to do it, but instead of giving them just the link to the document to access, you take that link to the document, and I'm not sure if it's going to show up here properly. And you kind of put in front of it this little this link that Hypothesis provides for you. I can go real quickly to the site that this kind of comes from, and you'll see what it actually kind of looks like. It's easy to do. It's a little hard to explain. It's really easy to do. And then once you've done it once, it makes perfect sense, right? So again, I would put these up there, right? And here's the link, right? And normally I would just link straight to the PDF, But instead what I did was I put in front of the actual link this via.hypothesis kind of precursor. And then that pulls the hypothesis, pulls the document basically into the hypothesis kind of cocoon, for lack of a better term. And they have access to that menu real easily. It works pretty well.
I'm sure, Felicia, and I'm sure, Jay, you would be willing, if some of us want to do this, because we're seeing some things of this, that you'd be willing maybe to sit down with us the first time we did it, because it's kind of a work.
No, like I said, the first time you do it, it seems a little strange, but once you've done it once, it's no problem at all. Right?
And can I ask you another question? Does this embed in I'm sorry if you already answered this, does this embed in Brightspace at all? Or like I saw you were doing it from a blog. Did you link your blog through Brightspace? Like, was it connected to your course at all?
It doesn't directly, which is kind of a shame, because I know Canvas has actually a hypothesis kind of module so that you can grade and it goes directly into Canvas. I think it's possible to do that with Brightspace. And I remember talking I think I asked Janice or maybe Yamlak or both of them about this a little bit. And then I just it started to seem like it was going to be a little more trouble than it was worth for the time being. But I don't think it works quite as easily with Brightspace, but you could still do the same thing. You could host those links in Brightspace, right? And then the students would click on them and it would still pull up the PDF or the website with the hypothesis tools attached to it, right? The other thing you can do with hypothesis is you can get an extension for your browser, so that anytime you're reading something online, you can click that little extension button and it will open up hypothesis for you, right? And then you can just comment on whatever you're reading. So you could also kind of do it that way. But again, it's a little bit of a setup at the beginning for the students, right? But so I've kind of started using it just for my own online reading. If I'm reading like an online text or something, I'm just taking my own notes through hypothesis, right? And I don't have to worry about generating the link. The little browser extension does that for me. But yeah, folks want to kind of really learn how to do that. I'd be glad to just kind of sit down with them. I didn't want to spend a whole lot of time in this workshop going through that. But again, it's a different kind of collaboration. Like I said, it's a much more asynchronous collaboration, but at the same time, if you think about the potential for reading being a collaborative activity, especially difficult texts, and I was having them read some difficult texts there, it really helped them kind of work through some of those things, as well as priming the discussion before we even got to class, which I'm always looking for ways to do that. Okay, I know we went a little bit over here, so I'm gonna, if you go back to our Jamboard, just as kind of one final exercise and activity. It's also that final, you see it says exit ticket on there as a link to the Jamboard as well, but I just dropped it in the chat. One thing you can't do with this is kind of control, at least I haven't figured out how to control which page opens up with a link in Jamboard. So if you go to the second page in Jamboard now, and it says do this at the end of the workshop, right? And a couple people already have, right? Again, use the sticky tool. If you want to try one of the other ones, that's fine too, right? But I find stickies work really well for this kind of thing. And drop a note that talks about the most useful thing you learned today.
Jay, thank you so much for this presentation.
Yeah, no problem.
I definitely have been craving ways to jazz up online teaching life. So this was right on time. The first time I used a collaborative document was doing a sign-up sheet through Google Docs. And I don't know why I didn't think about this last semester, but it it was really freaky seeing all of them in the document at once. And so I was like, hey, be careful that you're, and they're like, I'm going to sign up for this day. And I'm like, oh, somebody beat you to it. But it was, it was kind of comical, but glad to know about Jamboard as a way, especially in like my senior level class where they've had me before, but or, like the online world. So they're more primed to engage with me. My freshman level class with 50, it's just rough. So definitely the larger class size, but I like that you were saying that each breakout group could have its own board and giving more explicit instructions on like, hey, do this. Because what I've been doing with the breakout rooms is, here's your participation assignment for today. Discuss this in your small group. And then from that conversation, then go answer on your Brightspace assignment from like your own perspective. And that was just to help with grading and keeping up. And that was the first time I even did that with a face-to-face class because of social distancing and not collecting sheets. So that was pretty helpful, but I really, really appreciate this workshop.
That's great. And one thing I forgot to say about the idea of having a product that they turn in at the end of this. And again, I did the XCore 1000 last semester. And so I had these giant sections with like 37 students in each. And even in a small class, whenever I do kind of breakout rooms, I never end up having enough time for all of the groups to kind of formally present their findings, right? It's just, I give them too much time. I let them talk a little, it just never works out. But again, if you have them produce a product in this, even if they don't get a chance to kind of report back, right, during class, I just do what I did with that street exercise. I say, okay, somebody is responsible after class for sending me what you all produced, right? And again, I've got a little bit of a participation kind of grade tied to it as well. So, somebody needs to send that to me so that I can see that you actually did what I asked you to do as well. And so that kind of helps with those larger classes also, because again, if you've got a class of 50 and you do breakout rooms of 3 or 4 each, again, there's no way you're going to get to all 10 or 12 or 13 or whatever groups, right? In kind of the sharing part of the class without killing off the entire class time. So having them do those documents, that way you can kind of say, okay, let's hear from 2 or 3 groups, and everybody else, make sure you send me your document. So I found that helped a lot.
Also, as we are logging out, and I know that I want to be respectful of everybody's time. So Jay, thank you so much. Well, I'll give you the Zoom clap. Be sure you all look at Felicia's picture that she posted of her house float down the street, which is zooming out. So very, very related to our work.
In the chat?
Yeah, it's in the chat. Thanks for sharing that. Thanks for sharing that, Felicia. Thanks, everybody. Thank you, Jay.
Yep. Thank you all.
I'm sure Jay can hang out for a moment if you've got other questions. Thank you all so much for coming today. We appreciate it, and we look forward to hearing what you do. So share your successes so we can share it with other people, all right?
Yeah, let us know, and let us know if you find some other tools as well, because I'm always looking for new things to do in class also.